But some readers say that's just not enough. They say that if Oedipus knew what crimes he was prophesied to commit, all he had to do was to be very, very careful. A critic named Waldock mocked this view by asking if people thought Oedipus should have made a things not to do list. No killing anyone, especially an older man. No marrying anyone, especially an older woman. But if you think that, then you're the one thinking you can outwit the gods. You're the huge briskets guy. The host of Joe's Great Books is Joe Sharkey. He teaches at the University of Washington, Tacoma, but is not speaking for or sponsored by the UW. Hey everybody, welcome to Joe's Great Books, where we may not agree with the stupid shit you say, but we would give up sweets for a weekend, a 3-day weekend, to defend your right to say your stupid shit. Well, before we get to the literature, a quick DEI update. Here we are in the summer of 2025, and many people have been declaring DEI dead. Well, unfortunately, those reports are exaggerated. It's alive and well at UW Tacoma, because it's worked its way not just into our hearts and our minds, but into our hiring, tenuring, and firing processes. It'll be here long after I'm gone. Case in point. You may remember during one of the Frederick Douglass podcasts, I told you about a DEI administrator that I actually liked and thought I could work with. Well, she lasted less than 2 years, and my sources tell me that it was because she wasn't woke enough. Well, she will endure, and c'est la vie. Now, to the literature for today on JGB 17, first solo show in a while. Let's start with a plot summary. Now, I'd say spoiler, but all of the ancient Greeks that went into the theater of Dionysus in the 5th century, probably somewhere between 430 BC and 415 BC, they would already have known the plot, at least in its basic outlines. It was part of their mythology, part of their religion, and of course, part of their culture. You probably know the basic outlines of the plot, even if you didn't read it in middle school or in high school or in college. It's one of those plays, one of those works of literature that's been injected into the cultural bloodstream. First thing to know, there's a plague in Thebes. Let's read about it. I should point out we'll be using the Fagel's translation. I've had this for a very long time, since college, I think at least. I'll start with lines 31, more like 28 to 38, something like that. This is a priest in the prologue talking to King Oedipus, telling him about the crisis. Our city, look around you, see with your own eyes. Our ship pitches wildly, cannot lift her head from the depths, the red waves of death. Thebes is dying. A blight on the fresh crops and the rich pastures. Cattle sicken and die, and the women die in labor, children stillborn. In the plague, the fiery god of fever hurls down on the city, his lightning slashing through us. Raging plague in all its vengeance, devastating the house of Cadmus. And black death luxuriates in the raw, wailing miseries of Thebes. It's even worse than COVID. So, King Oedipus, who had years before arrived from a foreign land and saved the city once before, is called on to do so again. He sends an emissary to ask for divine aid from the oracle at Delphi, a shrine of the god Apollo, god of prophecy and plagues, of reason and sunlight. The two best disinfectants known to the ancient world, and sometimes rumored of in ours. And the news is disturbing. The murderer of the previous king, Laius, has never been found, and until he is brought to justice, the plague will continue to ravage Thebes. Oedipus sets out to do Apollo's will. After relentless investigations which several important characters warn against, or flatly beg him to stop, including brother-in-law Creon, prophet of Apollo Tiresias, his wife, Queen Jocasta, and the humble herdsman who happens to know the hidden truth. After ignoring all these pleas not to pursue the truth, our hero discovers a series of horrifying, shocking revelations. Not only is he himself the regicide, and thus the cause of the plague, But King Laius had, in fact, to Oedipus's shock and dismay, somehow been Oedipus's own father. And if that weren't enough, the widowed queen he had married, with whom he's been living as husband and wife for perhaps 15 years, with whom he has had 4 children, is not just the mother of their 4 children, but also his own mother. Fucking ancient Greeks. So think it through. Oedipus's daughters are his sisters, and they are one another's aunts, your father's sister, and also one another's nieces, your brother's daughter. And their brothers are their uncles and also their nephews, and, as I said, fucking Greeks. So the story is famous and infamous and compelling for these taboos. Oedipus kills his father and marries his mother. Now, everyone knows that Freud named one of his complexes after the play, though he acknowledged when he did it that Oedipus himself didn't actually have an Oedipal complex. It's also a shocking story for the irony of the plot. The hero is revealed as the villain. The king is revealed as the regicide, or king killer. The detective is revealed as the criminal, the doctor as the disease, and the riddle solver as the riddle itself. And the best, most golden man in the world is revealed as having committed the worst, blackest human taboos possible: incest and patricide. So, welcome to Joe's Great Books, Yuck Teen. Oedipus the King, the story of one tragic motherfucker. Literally. But by the end of the podcast, I hope to have convinced you that a nicer title is more fair. Oedipus the King, the story of one noble motherfucker. And I myself would even go this far. Oedipus the King, savior, scientist, prophet. How about that? It's hard to think of a great book that is more relentlessly misinterpreted than Oedipus the King, though Beowulf is close. A couple of podcasts coming up on that one. Even other teachers of the great books, including other podcasters, seem to me to get some of the most important ideas wrong. And they also seem to teach it to their students, because some of them come pre-programmed with these misunderstandings to my class. Of course, nowadays the smart money says that instead of going to the book or to their teachers, students are going straight to the 21st century oracle, the internet in its endless babble, or to its priests, the various generative AI chatbots, which collect the babble, copyright, schmopyright, organize it, helpfully, and cite their sources. Most of them real. So, imagine I'm a student assigned to write an essay on Oedipus the King, and I'm a little behind. The essay is due in 2 hours, and I haven't started reading the play. I don't typically read books. I mean, I'm busy. I'm a college student. Gonna be a doctor. You're a doctor. Hey, joke. What do they call the guy who graduates last in his medical school class? Answer? I don't know. Dumbass who wrote his own papers? Well, less than 2 hours to go now, but no worries. It's 2025. We've got AI. And that shit is quick and free. Now, I'm not going to have my chatbot write the whole thing for me. I'm just going to get a little help. Because, I've got principles. And one of my principles is that I should do as little real thinking as possible, especially with regard to college. I mean, I'm no sucker. So with my first question, I'm going straight for the jugular. What is the moral of the story of Oedipus the King? Come on. It's been too sick. Oh, there we go. From out of the ether, like a woman high on ethylene, study.com answers, the moral of the story of Oedipus Rex is that it is impossible to escape one's fate. Despite doing everything he can to avoid it, Oedipus still ends up fulfilling the prophecy. Now I remember learning in the 6th grade, every tragic hero, and I mean every tragic hero, has a tragic flaw. All you have to do is identify his tragic flaw, and your essay is practically written. And if I remember correctly, they all have pretty much the same tragic flaw. What was that Greek word? Huge briskets. Every tragic hero has huge briskets. Maybe that's why they're so proud. But as a student scholar, I should confirm. Back to AI. What is Oedipus's tragic flaw? Now, while we wait the millisecond for AI to generate a full-fledged answer, we should just note one thing. AI does not discriminate. It steals from everyone. Reddit, Quora, Quizlet, Study.com, paper mills, course materials from high school and college classes, some good, some not good, scholarly essays and books, some good, some not good, and probably your own private thoughts. Some good, some not so good, which means it gives you a broad sample of popular views online. So it's handy for collecting all the wrong opinions. So Google AI Gemini says, in the case of Oedipus, his tragic flaw is hubris. That's the word. Maybe it's short for huge briskets, or excessive pride. In thinking that he could outrun his fate, he inevitably causes it to happen. In ancient Greek culture, one would have to suffer from extreme pride to think they could defy the will of the gods. Well, I'm making progress. At this rate, I'll be done with my essay with an hour to spare, and then I'll have an extra hour to devote to doing something worthwhile on TikTok. Question number 3. How does Oedipus's hubris cause his downfall? Click. New bestie Gemini says, Oedipus is incredibly intelligent and prideful, believing he can understand and overcome any challenge through his own wit and reasoning. This overconfidence leads him to dismiss the prophecies he receives, including the one about killing his father and marrying his mother. And you don't want to dismiss that one. Gemini goes on. He attempts to control his fate instead of accepting the God's plan, which, ironically, leads him to fulfill the prophecy he desperately tries to avoid. Oedipus's disregard for the gods and their warnings leads to the tragic unraveling of his life and the destruction of his family. He also ignores the wisdom of others, including Tiresias and Jocasta, and the shepherd who knows Oedipus's true history. Gemini didn't happen to mention it this time, but other sources are very disapproving about the way Oedipus twists this shepherd's arm behind his back. Apparently, Oedipus was really conceited. And I hate conceited people, especially conceited people in books over 25 pages long that I'm supposed to read for a class with my eyes, which could be looking at TikTok instead. So, all I have to do is to collect these nuggets of literary and moral wisdom, and I'll pretty much have my essay, which I think I'm going to title Oedipus. Or how about some color? Oedipus's tragic flaw, huge briskets. AI won't give you that. So here are my topic sentences. In my 5-paragraph essay, because you must have exactly 5. That's what my teacher said. I have him on tape not saying that. Okay, so here are my topic sentences. First, Oedipus the King is a moral tale that proves that our lives are fated beyond our control. We have no free will. We get what we deserve because we made bad choices of our own free will. Second, Oedipus shouldn't have disregarded the gods' oracles, which was hubris. And he certainly shouldn't have turned his life upside down in order to avoid them, which was also hubris. Third, if he had just been smarter in trying to avoid committing these crimes, he wouldn't have done them. The crimes he was absolutely fated to do. And also apparently morally obliged to do because the gods had predicted them. And on top of that, he was reckless and violent and arrogant to other mortals, especially this one time to a nice old shepherd who was withholding information that could have saved the whole dying city. So, in conclusion, Oedipus the King is a classic story, which is why we continue to read it even after 2 centuries. Oedipus was kind of a douche, who had no choice but to do the bad things he tried not to do, but did anyway with his free will, so he got what he deserved for his unavoidable fated choices because hubris. End of self-contradictory student/chatbot essay. Here's the condensed version. Oedipus was fated. Oedipus was free. Oedipus didn't take the oracle seriously enough. Oedipus took the oracle too seriously. It was impious of Oedipus to try to outwit the gods. And when he tried to outwit the gods, he should have been smarter about it. If Oedipus is listening right about now, he's wishing he had a third eyeball to rake out. Because as we used to say on the mean streets of the suburbs of Yuba City, California, those are the bullest lies I've ever heard. All right, let's go from the misinterpretations to the corrections. Let's take them one by one. Claim number one. The moral of this story is that you can't escape your fate. Well, yes, but also no. Now, it's surely a truth of the story. It's just not the moral. Remember the details. Oedipus, as Gemini said, does everything he can to avoid fulfilling the oracles. When some random drunk guy tells him that he's not his father's son. This is an ancient "who's your daddy" joke. Now remember, Oedipus grew up in Corinth with his foster parents, Polybus and Merope. And so when the guy says he's not his father's son, it suggests that Merope has cheated on Polybus, and perhaps worse, that Oedipus is not a legitimate heir to the throne of Corinth. So what does Oedipus do? He immediately goes to the oracle at Delphi. He always shows a profound trust in the gods and their prophecies. What happens when he gets there? The Pythia, which is the priestess who ridiculously sat on a tripod and inhaled the fumes that wafted up to her out of a crevice in the earth, and then spoke blather that priests would take and then interpret and deliver as a prophecy, as an oracle. You can call the place the oracle, you can call the prophecy an oracle too. The Pythia, through the priests, instead of answering Oedipus's gosh darn question and explaining his parentage to him, that's when it unloads the prophecy. It says, you are going to kill your father and marry your mother. Well, what does Oedipus do? The instant he hears this, he runs off away from Corinth, leaving behind everything he's ever known, his family, his friends, and also the inheritance of the throne. He doesn't even go back for a toothbrush. All of this in order to avoid committing the taboos predicted of him. Now, yes, as just about every site notes, as if in the throes of an insight, Oedipus's attempts to avoid fulfilling his fate bring it about. Okay, but that's not the point. So it's true, you can't escape your fate if you're a hero in an ancient Greek tragedy, or if you're Macbeth. But here's the thing, you're not. No offense, but you're not important enough for the gods to mess with. Oedipus was a king. He was a hero. He was famous. Probably the only people in the US right now that the gods had bothered to make an oracle about would be Trump or that hot bimbo with the good genes. You know, only the really powerful people. I mean, have you received any oracles lately? Me neither. You know, actually, I did get one recently when I looked at Google Analytics. It didn't give me any data. It just said, your podcast will never be monetized. The Google gods can be very blunt. And also, don't tell me that we can apply the moral of Oedipus the King to our own lives because our socioeconomic background, or our genes, or our families, or an abstruse behavioralist, Sam Harrisist philosophy of neuroscience. Don't tell me that one of those shows us that we too are fated. Nah, Sophocles wasn't being figurative. He wasn't talking about the gods in the way that Jordan Peterson talks about the Bible. He was talking about real gods. Besides, do you really want to make the case that Oedipus's DNA or his upbringing made it impossible for him not to commit patricide and incest? I mean, he wasn't a Menendez brother. You want that angle? Read Sophocles' Antigone. You can make a good case for it there. Another podcast. But back to the story Sophocles chose to tell in Oedipus the King. Because remember, the story about fate and free will isn't the story that we witness. It all happened 10, 15 years before page 1. If that were the story Sophocles wanted us to focus on, he'd have chosen a very different race to be in medias of. He'd have picked up the action as Oedipus traveled to the oracle, and then followed him, as we watch, to the place where 3 roads and kings and princes meet, and then to the Sphinx, and then on to his wedding day. I guess we're glad he didn't. So I would say that the impotence of free will in the face of divine fate is not the real moral of the story. It's the moral of the backstory. It's the premise of the story we witness. A king contending with a plague and the sinking suspicion of his own immense shame. At the end, we'll draw a moral for that story. But for now, on to misinterpretation number 2. Oedipus has a tragic flaw, and it's hubris. Everyone says so. Funny thing, though, is that about half the critics think Oedipus was proud because he didn't take enough care to avoid the oracles. And the other half think he was proud because he had the audacity to try it all. That's what we call an inconsistency. If you say he was proud for not trying hard enough, then you don't get to turn around and say he shouldn't have tried at all. Now, the first interpretation seems to me pretty silly. It's hard to figure out what they mean when they say Oedipus dismisses or disregards the oracles, because obviously he doesn't. Remember, he immediately and radically changes his life. leaving home, family, future throne, all because of an oracle. And he does it the instant he hears it. Just picture our boy Oedipus sprinting down a strange road, on foot, in the opposite direction of everything he's ever known. Family, friends, the throne that's waiting for him, as if patricide and incest incarnate are on his heels. That's a man dismissing the gods' oracles? And even before that, far from ignoring the gods' prophecies, Oedipus seems to fear they might speak through the booze breath of some random drunk guy. And finally, consider that even before the people come to him for help, Oedipus has already sent Creon to Delphi. Let's read. Comes very early in the story. Lines 79 to 84. After a painful search, I found one cure. I acted at once. I sent Creon, my wife's own brother, to Delphi, Apollo the prophet's oracle, to learn what I might do or say to save our city. Oedipus doesn't dismiss the oracle. He respects it and fears it. He bases his entire life on it. But some readers say that's just not enough. They say that if Oedipus knew what crimes he was prophesied to commit, all he had to do was to be very, very careful. A critic named Waldock mocked this view by asking if people thought Oedipus should have made a things not to do list. Good one. No killing anyone, especially an older man. No marrying anyone, especially an older woman. Some even say he should have just killed himself. Easy as pie. But if you think that, then you're the one thinking you can outwit the gods. You're the huge briskets guy. Now, some readers ask less of Oedipus. They say all he had to do was to keep his ancient Greek road rage in check when the older man almost ran him over in his carriage, which does seem reasonable, I admit, especially since Oedipus doesn't just kill the man in charge, but the whole party, or, as he puts it rather disturbingly in line 898, I killed them all, every mother's son. Hear the irony. Now, I'm not going to spend much time trying to convince you that Oedipus was justified in his mass murder, but here's an important point. Sophocles probably did. He seems to be responding to his critics when, in the play that continues the story, Oedipus at Colonus, 405 BC, so at least a decade after, he has Oedipus insist that that incident at the place where the three roads meet was kill or be killed. But however we read it, that's not hubris. That's just anger mismanagement. Side note, I've been making that ancient Greek road rage joke for decades now, but I heard it on literally every podcast I listened to as I surveyed the competition. I'm going to stop saying it. But the decisive evidence that Oedipus didn't commit patricide and incest out of hubris is that, as all-time great Oedipus the King critic E.R. Dodds puts it, if that's the way we're supposed to see it, quote, someone on the stage ought to tell us so. Henceforth, Dodds rule. Now, in ancient Greek tragedies, they didn't go in for the contemporary insistence that everything has to be ambiguous, on the logic that we all supposedly share today, that there's really no such thing as absolute right and wrong, just perspective. The ancient Greeks knew that that was another of the world's boldest lies, and usually it was the chorus that told us so. In Oedipus the King, the chorus has many chances to tell us that Oedipus was brought down by his hubris, especially in the last two odes after the truth has outed, and they don't do it. We'll listen to what they do say later. The second interpretation, that Oedipus was proud because he had the audacity to try not to commit the prophesied crimes, is even easier to answer. The oracle didn't command him to kill dad and marry mom. It just announced that he would. There was no command he could disobey. No one, God or not, at any moment in the play says that it would be okay for Oedipus to do a patricide or to do an incest. Gross. Also consider the oracle at Delphi was a real-life historical institution. It gave real-life prophecies in history, and we know how the ancient Greeks responded to them. The prophecies were often ambiguous, and therefore interpreted with caution and sometimes with creative self-interest, the way you might interpret your horoscope. For example, as the Persian Empire escalated its attacks on the Greek city-states in the early 5th century, Sophocles' century, the Athenians went to Delphi for advice about how to defend themselves. As the U.S. Naval Institute tells it, the first answer was, wretched men, leave your homes and flee afar. Fire and sword shall destroy your city and the temples of the gods. The envoys pleaded for a better answer and were then told, Pallas Athena cannot entreat Zeus for you, but he grants that when all else is destroyed, the wooden wall shall protect you. End quote. Now, to me, that sounds like hunker down behind the walls of your city. which is what the Athenians would do around 50 years later in the Peloponnesian War against Sparta. Didn't work out. But instead, they interpreted the oracle to mean, take to your ships, which are made of wood and therefore pretty much like walls. That's how you read it if you think you've got a better chance at sea than on land. And it worked out brilliantly for the Athenians against the Persians. After the Persians ransacked Athens, including its theater, the Athenians defeated them at the naval battle of Salamis, 480. So in real-life history, in the very century in which Oedipus the king was performed, Athens itself had not only shopped for oracles, they had also creatively interpreted the second, less hopeless one. So attempting to escape the seeming literal meaning of an oracle was not an unthinkable impiety. It was part of one of Athens' proudest moments, and everyone in the theater would have known that. So for Oedipus to have hope that he might have dodged twin taboos, that's not hubris. That's just virtue. But let's go further and call the bluff of this interpretation. Okay, smarty pantses, you tell Oedipus. If he isn't supposed to try to avoid the oracles, what should he have done? Because when you say that by running from his fate, he ran right into it, you seem to be saying that he shouldn't have run from it. Well then, suppose Oedipus had interpreted the oracles as a command. Weirdly, they were atrocious crimes. Isn't that special? Mediocre church lady. But seriously, are we to think that the gods would have smiled on Oedipus if he'd come straight home from Delphi and murdered Polybus and then, what, raped Merope? Way to be pious, Oedipus. And don't stop shivering just yet, because in that scenario, neither of the taboo acts would have been fulfilled yet. The oracle was about Oedipus's biological parents, not his foster parents. In other words, he would still have had Laius and Jocasta to deal with. And there's no reason to think that the oracle wouldn't have come true in application to them as well. So think about it. If Oedipus had obeyed the oracle, his body count, both kinds, wouldn't have diminished. They would have doubled. As always, I'd like to beg, please subscribe, like, comment, or share. Get the word out about this podcast if you enjoy it. Consider an alternate reality, one in which a super stupid, super pious Oedipus forces the oracles to come true by killing his foster father, forcing himself on his foster mother. Now, in this scenario, how difficult would it be for the gods to make the real oracles come true? Easy. Oedipus kills Polybus, inherits throne. Corinth comes in dispute with rival Pallas. Thebes happened all the time. Go to war. Noble kings fight. Mano a mano. Young king wins. Political marriage. Older but still hot queen. And voila. Oracles fulfilled. So congratulations to those of you who think Oedipus should have just gotten it over with. You just discovered a way to make one of the most gruesome tragedies in history worse. Good thing you weren't in Oedipus's sandals. Last, remember Dodd's rule. No one ever says that our boy Oedipus shouldn't have run. In fact, he's scorned by everyone at the end for having done what he did, despite his best attempts, as Mater would put it, to not to. But wait, you ask, in a last-ditch attempt to make Oedipus proud, what about his rudeness to the blind prophet Tiresias? Can't we at least call that hubris? Okay, let's think it through. But only if you promise, cross your heart, to remember that when he confronts Tiresias, he's already met his destiny with Dad and Mom, 15 years before. Here's what Gemini says about that tete-a-tete. When the blind prophet Tiresias reveals the truth about Laius's murderer being the current king, Oedipus dismisses him, fueled by anger and suspicion. He stubbornly refuses to consider the possibility of his own guilt. Well, why would he? Would you? No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. Imagine, you're a mother. You wake up in the middle of the night to find your newborn baby burning up with a temperature of 106. You rush to the ER and wait for an agonizingly long time to be admitted to see the night shift doctor. Your baby seems even hotter now. You weep in gratitude for the doctor's help and expertise. All the nurses say he's the very best doctor in the hospital. And you ask him, what's wrong with your baby? But he only sighs and says, you don't want to know. Shocked, you hold up your beet red baby to him and beg him to help, but he still refuses. You're out of your mind now, and you ask him if it's that he doesn't know what's wrong with your baby. But he assures you he knows. And when you take the doctor by the stethoscope and demand he save your innocent infant's life, He frees himself and says, "Fine, I'll tell you. You're the reason your baby is dying. Now get out of my hospital." How would you respond? Now imagine that you're the chief administrator of that hospital. If you compare this scenario to the confrontation in the play between Oedipus and Tiresias, I think you'll agree that the one in the play is parallel, but more extreme. Not just one infant, but all infants of Thebes are at stake. And Oedipus is not one mother or one hospital exec. He's the mother or father of the city. He's the king. So here's how the exchange goes. Now, we already know that Oedipus is sent for Tiresias twice within the hour. And on his entry, Oedipus praises him for like 20 lines. "O Tiresias, master of all the mysteries of our life, all you teach and all you dare not tell, signs in the heavens, signs that walk the earth. Blind as you are, you can feel all the more what sickness haunts our city. You, my lord, are the one shield, the one savior we can find. So I beg you, begrudge us nothing now. No voice, no message plucked from the birds, the embers, or the other romantic ways within your grasp. Rescue yourself, your city, rescue me, rescue everything infected by the dead. We are in your hands. For a man to help others with all his gifts and native strength, that is the noblest work." Tiresias replies, "Just send me home. You bear your burdens, and I'll bear mine. It's better that way. Please believe me." Oedipus replies, "Strange response. Unlawful, unfriendly too to the state that bred and reared you. You withhold the word of God." Actually, it's not just treason, it's blasphemy. Oedipus goes on, "For the love of God, don't turn away. Not if you know something. We beg you, all of us, on our knees." That's what nowadays we would call an implicit or implied stage direction. Oedipus is on his knees. After all this, you're going to tell me that Oedipus is the one full of hubris? So Tiresias knows the truth. He knows how to save the city, but he won't tell. That's treason. In the years after the 9/11 terrorist attack, we would have called this the ticking time bomb scenario. What is permitted if you have a terrorist in custody who knows where a bomb with a timer is planted? Well, if it's me, I'm thinking back to the immortal words of Senator John McCain, who said, "Well, sometimes you got to do what you got to do." Bad imitation, except the Oedipus, of course, agrees. After all, his entire kingdom is a ticking time bomb. But all he really does here is to unload verbally. He accuses Tiresias of treason, easy case, and conspiracy, weak case. Oh, and the chorus agrees as well, even though they know Tiresias, quote, sees with the eyes of Lord Apollo. In the choral ode that follows this confrontation, the first after the Pardos, the chorus say, "Zeus and Apollo know, they know, the great masters of all the dark and depths of human life. But whether a mere man can know the truth, whether a seer can fathom more than I, there is no test, no certain proof, though matching skill for skill, a man can outstrip a rival. No, not till I see these charges proved will I side with his accusers, my king's accusers. Never will I convict my king, never in my heart." Now, none of this should be taken to cast Oedipus as a chorus boy, because he does have a few moments of true hubris. Remember, though, true hubris is not what we call pride today. And it's certainly not mere arrogance, and it's certainly not being bossy in a crisis. It's when a mortal gets uppity in the face of a god, boasting you can weave better than Athena, play your flute better than Apollo, give birth better than Leto, or just flying too close to the sun. That kind of thing. So when our boy Oedipus emerges from the palace to his desperate citizens and says, "You pray to the gods? Let me answer your prayers." Well, at first, it sure sounds like hubris, but you can tell it's not because his actions belie the claim. Even at that moment, he's already sent Creon to get guidance from the oracle, that is, from the god Apollo. He doesn't think he can do it on his own. Likewise, when the leader of the chorus suggests he should send for Tiresias, Oedipus has already done that too, before being asked. So, how to reconcile those actions with his apparent pride? Consider what he says when he tells the priest that he's sent for help from Apollo. His request was, "To learn what I might do or say to save our city," 83 to 85. So he boasts, but in the context of his service to Apollo. This is how ancient heroes understood the world. Read Homer. The wise ones take it for granted that no man can do great things apart from the gods. But that doesn't mean he's not doing them. That's the only way a man does anything great, with divine help. A famous exception is Ajax in Sophocles' play of the same name. He tells Athena he doesn't really need her help on the battlefield of Troy. If you know how he ends up, you know that this was a case of hubris. So what are Oedipus's moments of honest Greek god hubris? As he lets loose on Tiresias, he notes that he, not Tiresias, solved the riddle of the Sphinx. Where were you, he says. You and your birds, your gods, nothing. Whoops, that's 448 to 450. Yeah, if you acknowledge that Tiresias gets his mojo from the gods and then mock his mojo, yeah, you're showing actual hubris. Also, when he accuses Creon of conspiring to kill him, Creon asks, quote, "What if you're wholly wrong?" And Oedipus replies, "No matter, I must rule." That's around 703. That's almost verbatim what the tyrannical king says in another play by Sophocles, the Antigone, named after Oedipus's daughter. She challenges the king, and the king talks about the city as if it was his instead of the gods. That king's name? Our boy Creon. And when a king declares himself more important than his whole city, it's basically like claiming divinity. So, huge briskets. Last, and most seriously of all, when the truth is finally about to out, our boy Oedipus calls himself son of chance. 1188. Let's read more. I'm going to do 1185 to 1189. So at this point, Oedipus is on the cusp of discovering the truth about everything, about the regicide, about the plague, and about his own identity. He says, "Let it burst. Whatever will, whatever must, I must know my birth. No matter how common it may be, I must see my origins face to face. She, perhaps, his wife Jocasta, she with her woman's pride may well be mortified by my birth, but I count myself the son of chance. The great goddess, giver of all good things. She is my mother." Now, this is blasphemy, and the very kind of blasphemy the play was written to refute, that we humans are free of divine influence. Now, Jocasta had primed him for it in lines 1069 to 1072. Here, Jocasta, having told Oedipus about an oracle that she and her former husband, King Laius, had received, that definitely didn't come true, says, "What should a man fear? It's all chance. Chance rules our lives. Not a man on earth can see a day ahead, groping through the dark. Better to live at random, best we can. And as for this marriage with your mother, have no fear. Live, Oedipus, as if there's no tomorrow." Whoops. But you have to remember, in all of these moments, Oedipus is in a moment of sky-high emotion. In the first, he thinks he's the next king to be murdered. In the last, he's expressing a desperate wish that he can still escape the guilt of regicide, and the plague closing in on him now, and on him alone, especially since his wife has just run off, wailing like a madwoman for some reason. Even then, Oedipus doesn't hold back. He strides forward. He says, "Let it burst." On to claim number 3. How did Oedipus's hubris lead to his downfall? Once again, it didn't. Not if by downfall you mean it the way Oedipus and Sophocles would have defined it. His commission of the patricide and the incesticide. It's the fact that Oedipus did those atrocious things that devastates him. The fact that people find out about it, it's really beside the point. Remember, nothing Oedipus does during the play fates him to kill his father or marry his mother. As our hero notes in the later play, Oedipus at Colonus, the first oracle came before he was even born. So if his oracles are punishments for his crimes, he must have been a very bad fetus. Now, the confusion seems to be what we understand by the word downfall. The way Lit Charts expresses this confusion is typical. Oedipus's downfall comes not from his deeds themselves, but from his persistent efforts to learn the truth, through which he reveals the true nature of those terrible deeds. Now, okay, obviously, Oedipus revealing the truth of the regicide and of his own appalling personal history, including incest, is indeed the fall of his public persona. That falls down. He's not going to be king anymore. But I am regularly surprised at how few students seem to recognize that there's more than one aspect of a man that can fall down. The typical interpretation seems, unconsciously, one hopes, to come from the belief that even if Oedipus had still killed his father and still married his mother, and therefore that his children were still products of incest, it would have been okay, as long as no one found out about it. In other words, committing crimes doesn't harm you if no one finds out you committed them. Or, What other people don't know you did doesn't hurt you. Kind of like using AI to write your damn essay. Now, for God's sake, if that's what you think about right and wrong, at least hide it. Now, it's tempting just to blame this view on Gen Z or Gen Y, but in fact, several key characters in the play agree that Oedipus shouldn't play the Pandora app. They keep telling him not to investigate the murder of the previous king. When Oedipus asks him to announce the latest oracle in front of the people of Thebes, Creon demurs. He says in lines 103 to 104, "If you want my report in the presence of these people, well, I'm ready now. Or we might go inside." Oedipus replies, "Speak out, speak to us all. I grieve for these, my people, far more than I fear for my own life." He's always saying that, and I think we're supposed to believe him. Likewise, when Oedipus begs Tiresias to solve the latest riddle of Thebes and save the city, the prophet says, we're on line 374, "None of you knows, and I will never reveal my dreadful secrets, not to say your own." Turning the knife a little bit. Oedipus protests. Tiresias says, "I'd rather not cause pain for you or me. Why this useless interrogation? You'll get nothing from me." And then there's Queen Jocasta. She clearly solves the mystery before Oedipus and knows that her husband is her child. When Oedipus is insisting on talking to the shepherd that she knows is going to reveal everything, she says, lines 1156 to 63, "Old shepherd, talk, empty nonsense. Don't give it another thought. Don't even think." Oedipus protests, "Fail to solve the mystery of my birth? Not for all the world." She says, "Stop. In the name of God, if you love your own life, call off this search. My suffering is enough." And she runs off. And finally, when Oedipus commands this shepherd to explain the true story of the infant he'd exposed on a mountaintop exactly Oedipus years before, the herdsman says, 1269 to 70, "God help us, why? What more do you need to know?" He refuses to talk until Oedipus threatens to torture him. But here's the problem. Anytime you agree with these characters and say Oedipus should have stopped searching for the truth about the regicide, about himself, they're the same thing. You're saying he, the king of Thebes, should let women die in labor, children be born dead, and the plague devour the population. You're saying that he should let Thebes die because you've forgotten about the big fat plague on the city and the fact that it's Oedipus's sacred duty to save it, as he did once before, no matter the cost. And he does save it at the cost of everything. And he can feel it coming. As he collects clues, he comes to suspect that he is the murderer of the old king. That by itself is enough for Oedipus to call himself abomination. That would also, of course, make him the cause of the plague and all of the death it has caused. But he begins to suspect something worse, that he is in fact the super abomination of incest and patricide that the oracle prophesied he would become. Yet he never pauses. He only accelerates. He insists on the truth. It costs him his kingship, the kingship of Corinth as well as of Thebes, his reputation, his happiness, his self-conception, his dignity. And also his wife. Smack his mother. Smack his wife. Smack. Chinatown. Those weren't real slaps. You have to give Faye Dunaway a lot of credit, by the way. Nicholson is smacking the shit out of her. If I was directing a performance of Oedipus the King, I'd have the sounds of screaming women flood the stage before the palace doors open and Oedipus emerges. And then I'd pay the actors to follow me to class and wail in the ear of the next student who said that Oedipus asked too many questions. So, how shall we describe Oedipus's downfall? It's moral and existential. His unwitting actions have transformed him into unholiness. As he explains, lines 1541 to 46, "The blackest things a man can do, I have done them all. No more, it's wrong to name what's wrong to do. Quickly, for the love of God, hide me somewhere, kill me, hurl me into the sea where you can never look on me again." Oedipus takes responsibility for his crimes, even though he did everything he could to avoid them. He doesn't imagine that intention is all that matters. He accepts himself as a criminal, even though he never intentionally committed a crime. And he would feel that way about himself, even if no one else ever found out. That's why it's a bad reading to say, as so many sources do, that one of the deep ironies of the play is that Oedipus foolishly sentenced Laius's killer to death or exile, only to find out later that he was sentencing himself. But Oedipus never asks not to be punished. He's not hoist on his own petard. In fact, He urges Creon to kill him, even when the oracle clearly allowed just for exile. Creon, just to rub it in, says that he has to wait to decide until after he's consulted the oracle. So, Oedipus's downfall wasn't the publication of his crimes, just the fact of them. And what brought about their publication wasn't his pride. It was his virtue. And part of that virtue is his piety. He's investigating the regicide because the oracle at Delphi commanded him to. So, what should we learn from Oedipus the king? I'd say two big things. One, the world is unjust. The gods hold your life in their hands, and they don't go down. It's true, Oedipus can't escape his fate. But what does that tell us? It just tells us the world is unfair. Think back to that alternate story in which Oedipus tries to obey the oracle. Becomes king of Corinth, defeats Thebes in war, marries widowed queen. Which story seems more rigged? That one, or the one Sophocles actually told? Clearly, the one Sophocles told, because the world of Oedipus the king is rigged. The story is not one of revelation. It's one of mandate and execution. Now, there are stories in which the future is known, but there's no clear evidence that the prophets who reveal that future have the power to make it come true. Think Macbeth and its witches. Yes, the act of revealing the future can certainly be regarded as the first domino to fall, but one domino doesn't make a domino set. This is how it is with Tiresias. He's read tomorrow's newspaper, but there's no reason to think that he made the headline happen. Now, if you doubt the interventions of the gods, here's a list. Oedipus asks the oracle if Polybus is really his father. Its answer is a non sequitur that sends him directly to the place where the three roads meet, where he just happens to collide with King Laius, who just happens to be traveling towards the same place at precisely the speed that will result in this confrontation. And then Thebes just happens to have a sphinx problem, and only Oedipus can solve the riddle, which, oddly, wins him the wife of the king he just murdered. Jocasta, apparently, was no Penelope. Odyssey podcasts in the works. And then, of course, there's the explicit act of intervention, the plague, sent by Apollo, whose day job is Delphi, which of course calls for an envoy to the oracle, which allows Apollo to make his rationale explicit. The regicide must be found. Now, we might even throw in the divine inspiration of the drunk guy who slurs out the daddy joke that Polybus isn't Oedipus's real father, the overwhelming sympathy of the shepherd who was supposed to expose baby Oedipus on the mountain, as well as the sympathy of the shepherd who received him in Corinth, and the fact that both just happen to be involved in the deaths of Oedipus's two fathers. The shepherd from Thebes happens to be the sole survivor of the clash at Three Forks, and the one from Corinth happens to be the messenger of Polybus's death. Rigged, rigged, rigged. Now, the misinterpretation that it just isn't clear if the oracles are revelations or mandates is oddly common. It's made all the odder by the fact that my hero of Oedipus the King interpretation, E.R. Dodds, seems to share it. He writes, as A.W. Gom, another critic, puts it, the gods know the future, but they do not order it. They know who will win the next Scotland and England football match, but that does not alter the fact that the victory will depend on the skill, the determination, fitness of the players, and a little on luck. That may be true of other fate-free will stories, but not Oedipus the king. The gods do order it. They let a foul go here, give out a red card there, and send a wind to change the trajectory of the ball at key moments, like a penalty kick. If they need to, they put a sphinx at midfield. If all that evidence isn't enough, though, just listen to the characters. Everyone who addresses the issue takes it for granted that the gods intervene whenever they like. The chorus in the Pardas, the first choral ode, they know Apollo sent the plague, and that he and only he will lift it. About 180, I call Apollo, archer astride the thunder heads of heaven, O triple shield against death, shine before me now. If ever, once in the past, you stopped some ruin launched against our walls, you hurled the flame of pain far, far from Thebes, you gods, come now, come down once more. Jocasta assumes the oracles are mandates, not mere disclosures. 799, whatever the god needs and seeks, he'll bring to light himself with ease. Tiresias thinks the same thing. Apollo is active, not merely observing. Speaking to Oedipus around line 428, he says, true, it is not your fate to fall at my hands. Apollo is quite enough, and he will take some pains to work this out. That's the key line. And of course, Oedipus himself agrees. Lines 467 to 8. Apollo, friends, Apollo. He ordained my agonies, these my pains on pains. You might compare Oedipus's hapless, almost comic attempts to escape the gods to a rat in a maze. Imagine Oedipus fleeing from a trap at one end of the maze when, too quick for him to notice, the gods reach out, grab hold of the maze, and turn it 180 degrees in between two rat strides. Turns out that even E.R. Dodds nods with two Ds. Now, here's why all that matters. It shows us that the play Oedipus the King is, in fact, the Greek version of the Book of Job. So Bernard Knox, my real favorite Oedipus the King critic, writes in the introduction to this edition of the Fagles translation that in 5th century Athens, there was growing discontent with divine prophecy and the oracles. And Knox notes specifically that Jocasta expresses these doubts in lines 948 to 950. So much for prophecy. It's neither here nor there. From this day on, I wouldn't look right or left. Hubris. Oedipus responds, true, true. Hubris. Now, this passage is super important because it precipitates the only moment in the play when the chorus turns on their king. By the time we get to the second stasimon, we're about 60% of the way through the play, and I would say we're at the crux, we're at the place where the teeter totters. They say, but if any man comes striding, high and mighty, in all he says and does, no fear of justice, no reverence for the temples of the gods, let a rough doom tear him down, repay his pride, breakneck, ruinous pride. Now, the chorus never actually mentions Oedipus their king or Jocasta their queen by name, but as you get to the end of the passage, you do hear them talk about their masters. And of course, this is all coming just a page or two after the passage I read before, where Jocasta and Oedipus dismiss the oldest of the oracles. What they do focus on very sharply is the oracles, especially the authenticity, the trustworthiness of the oracles. 985 to 997, the chorus says, never again will I go reverent to Delphi, the inviolate heart of earth, or Apollo's ancient oracle at Abi, or Olympia of the fires, unless these prophecies all come true for all mankind to point toward in wonder. King of kings, if you deserve your title Zeus, remember, never forget, you and your deathless, everlasting reign. They are dying, the old oracles sent to Laius. Nowhere Apollo's golden glory now. The gods go down. The picture I think of is a Greek temple. The top part you could think of as representing the divine world, basically, the roof. The base represents the human world. So you've got the divine world and the human world. The columns represent what connects them. What connects them? Divine prophecy. If the columns crack, the gods go down. Now, this doesn't mean that the gods would actually go down if the worshippers stopped worshiping them. It's if they were pets that the humans could stop feeding. But it is a striking sort of ultimatum for a Sophoclean chorus to deliver. Arguably, it's a bald act of hubris. Now, that's fairly nuts for one of Sophocles' plays. He's regarded as the most traditional of the big three tragedians. He's the defender of Greek religion and conventional values, and his choruses tend to fit the simple idea we have of them as stand-ins for the city of the fictional world of the play. So they stand in for popular opinion, and therefore the Athenian audience in the theater. So usually they're very pious. Aeschylus's and Euripides' choruses, well, they can be more surprising. Another 10 podcasts. Now, let's dwell on the insanity of the ultimatum for a second. The chorus believes that the oracle sent to Laius has already failed. Laius is dead, and not killed by his son, who died as an infant. So what they're demanding is a literal revision of history. Stunningly, the gods oblige. Okay, now consider that the gods have known about the fulfillment of the oracles for a decade at least. Why did they wait until just this day to send the plague in order to reveal that? Why did they let the doubt of the veracity of their oracles fester instead of clearing it away immediately? And why did they leave Thebes to discover it, datum by datum, instead of just announcing it? I think the answer is clear. They were playing the long game, an easy thing to do when you never die. And also, they wanted to make a splash. They wanted to annihilate any doubt in their oracles, and therefore, in them. Oedipus's whole life. And if the gods see the future, we mean all of it, from conception to unnatural death, was a grand sacrifice to themselves. They raised him up to golden heights, precisely so that when they brought him down, hard, no one could fail to see the splatter. In other words, the gods have known for the whole of Oedipus's life what this Theban chorus would demand of them, namely, give us something for all mankind to point toward and wonder. And they knew what they would give them. Oedipus himself, his history rewritten and his eyes raked out. His story, which will outlast stones, becomes a new column in their temple. Oh, you doubt the oracles, do you? Athenian parents might ask their children. Well, let me tell you the story of Oedipus the king. They play this podcast. The gods reveal themselves not as dispensers of justice, as if they were the moral police of the mortal world. They reveal themselves as mysterious divinities who do what they goddamn want, and of whom you'd better be afraid. Because if this is what they do to the best of us, and Oedipus, as I noted, better than you, or how many times have you saved your city, then imagine what they could do to ordinary old us. The story isn't about justice. It's about power. It's the Greek book of Job, chapter 1, verses 1 to 2. There was a man in the land of Thebes, whose name was Oedipus. And that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born unto him 2 son brothers and 2 daughter sisters. Adapted. At the end of the book of Job, there is a grand theophany, or appearance of the divine. God comes down as a whirlwind to cow Job and glory in his own divine creativity. Joe's Great Books, number 6. And at the end, all Oedipus gets is this t-shirt with his blood and eyes on it. Now, a fun byproduct of this correct reading of Oedipus the King is that it makes Aristotle wrong. I know. Our boy Aristotle said Sophocles' play was the ideal form of tragedy, the story of a mostly good man who falls from good fortune to misery because of some mistake, when in fact, Sophocles' play is the story of a wholly good man, holy enough, who falls from good fortune to misery through no fault of his own. A plot that Aristotle calls revolting or shocking. Now, I've argued that I don't think Sophocles regarded Oedipus as having made a true mistake, at least not one that brings about his downfall. If we insist that he must have made a mistake, though, I'd say it was being born. The Shepherd calls it. 1304 to 1305. If you are the man he says you are, believe me, you were born for pain. Now, the Shepherd doesn't mean it literally, but I think a complete reading of the play calls for the literal sense. Apollo literally brought Oedipus into being in order that he model a lesson the Greeks needed to learn again, that his oracles were infallible. You might say the real story that we're watching begins when Apollo sent that first oracle to Laius. The story middles when the Greek world mistakenly believes that the oracle failed, and the story ends when Apollo reveals to Thebes and all the world that his oracles damn well did come true. It's a divine comedy for Apollo, who still isn't sick of winning. Think of it, though, it is a harsh idea. A man literally brought into being specifically so he could suffer. But this plot dynamic shows up in the stories of a religion we regard as much less harsh. Take chapter 11, verses 1 through 3 of the Gospel of John. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents sinned. It is so the works of God might be made visible through him." In other words, the man was born blind and lived blind to this point in his life precisely so that Jesus could cure him and reveal himself as the Christ. Now, when Jesus learns that his friend Lazarus is dying, he waits 2 days before going to Bethany. If he's to raise Lazarus, Lazarus has to die first. Now, if you think this is callous, almost like bending an old man's arms behind his back in order to save an entire city, well, then consider that if there ever was a man who came into being specifically so he could die, it was Jesus Christ. Back to Oedipus. I said his tragic flaw was being born. That is, if by being born we mean being subject to the will of the gods, which is not a moral failing, only an existential one, then the chorus agrees with me. Moreover, they do it at the most decisive of moments, their final 2 odes. First comes immediately after Oedipus finally uncovers all the truths and all their terrors. He wails, 1306 to 1310, "O God, all come to true, all burst to light. O light, now let me look my last on you. I stand revealed at last. Cursed in my birth, cursed in marriage, cursed in the lives I cut down with these hands." The chorus sings as if in reply, "Oh, the generations of men, The dying generations, adding the total of all your lives, I find they come to nothing. Does there exist? Is there a man on earth who seizes more joy than just a dream, a vision? And the vision no sooner dawns than dies, blazing into oblivion. You are my great example. You, your life, your destiny, Oedipus, man of misery. I count no man blessed. They go on. You outranged all men, bending your bow to the breaking point. You captured priceless glory. Oh, dear God, and the Sphinx came crashing down, the virgin, claws hooked like a bird of omen singing, shrieking death. Like a fortress reared in the face of death, you rose and saved our land. From that day on, we called you king. We crowned you with honors, Oedipus, towering over all. Mighty king of the 7 gates of Thebes. But now to hear your story, is there a man more agonized, more wed to pain and frenzy? Not a man on earth, the joy of your life ground down to nothing. O Oedipus, name for the ages. Now, in case you were too distracted or traumatized to have understood it the first time, they say it again in the very final lines of the play. Let's look at 1678 to the end. People of Thebes, my countrymen, look on Oedipus. He solved the famous riddle with his brilliance. He rose to power, a man beyond all power. Who could behold his greatness without envy? Now what a black sea of terror has overwhelmed him. Now as we keep watch and wait the final day, count no man happy till he dies, free of pain at last. Damn. That's what we should learn from the plot of Oedipus the King. Sure, you can't escape your doom. If the gods think you're worth destroying, they'll destroy you. But to be honest, I'm not really sure what to do with that, except not to mouth off. What we can learn from Oedipus's character, which is not patricidal, not incestuous, not mostly violent, and more thoughtful than rash, though fine, occasionally proud, because Oedipus is noble. Yes, nobler than you. Fate and taboo, they're important to the play, and they certainly make it memorable. But the heart of a tragedy is the way a particular man responds to a situation. The glory of Oedipus is that he responds to these facts with greatness. Yes, he has flaws. Yes, he makes mistakes, but they're understandable, especially given the crisis that he's in. And stood next to his virtues, they shrink to practically nothing. Because Oedipus has a powerful morality. He cares about 2 things far more than he cares about his own public humiliation, his downfall: Thebes and truth. We can take this even further and draw a conclusion I haven't seen drawn elsewhere, though after 2,400 years, I'm sure it's been drawn a couple hundred times. Recall that one formulation of the criticism that Oedipus's tragic flaw is pride goes like this: his over-reliance on his intellect leads him to disrespect divine guidance. This attempt to name him dirty is so wrong, it helped me get clearer about the play and its tragic hero. Oedipus's reliance on his intellect is not a vice. It's a virtue the gods themselves found useful. In fact, they relied on it. Oedipus uses his intellect to solve the riddle of the plague, as he had the riddle of the Sphinx before, to reveal the truth, and thus to trumpet the omnipotence of the gods and the infallibility of their oracles. In this way of thinking, Oedipus's relentless, ceaseless search for the truth is the model of piety. The gods trust in Oedipus's intellect to solve the mystery. They trust in his relentless drive to reveal their handiwork for them. He is their puppet and their publicist. That he is the greatest man alive is what makes him perfect for their aim. To teach us, once again, the difference between a man, even the greatest, and the gods. It's well known that Tiresias, who sees with the eyes of Apollo, is the great prophet of the play. But truly, I say unto you, in this play, Oedipus is the greater prophet of the gods. They entrusted him with discovering and revealing their truth, a truth Tiresias shuddered to reveal. They knew he, Oedipus, among all men, would hunt it out, even if it meant his self-destruction. He would let it burst. Thus ends the story of Oedipus the King, savior, scientist, prophet.